So I assume your own kids have modified the way you look at the world, but have they affected your writing as well?
Oh, profoundly. I started writing when I was pregnant with my second child. Before I got married, for the first time I had been a teacher, and it never crossed my mind to write. I was an elementary teacher, and this took all of my energy and all of my devotion. And then I got married and I had my first child, and I was home full-time and I didn't like it. I love the baby, but I found it very unsatisfying to be home. And then I got pregnant a second time, and it was a difficult pregnancy, and now I was not only home all of the time with a baby, but I was home all the time with the baby sick. And I really felt as though the walls were closing in, and there was a need to do something. And one morning I woke up, and out of the clear blue I said, I'm going to write a story. And what money I made in the early years, the odd $100 or $200 for a story here and there, frequently went for nursery school and for babysitters so that I could have even more time to write. And I don't think that there's any part of my career that hasn't been influenced by being a mother, from the subject matter to the actual logistics of it, to even that I'm now a full-time writer and my husband pays the majority of the bills, but I feel a great pressure to produce, to keep writing, because my children are now ready for college.
My compadres in Control have asked some other SF writers how parenthood has affected their writing careers.
Well, what writing career? It takes up a lot of time. It takes up a lot of time. It's great. It's really good fun being a mother. I would not consider a second child under any circumstances. One is definitely enough. It's the first year I just drove myself into the ground. I wrote nights, holidays, weekends. My husband and I were working back-to-back shifts. I would come, he works in a school, so I would come off shift with the baby at 4 and go up to my desk. And he would come off shift at school and come straight home and do childcare. And it was a hard year. Now we've both slowed down. I do still write. I'm still writing now. I plan to go on writing, but it's been absorbing, and I wouldn't have missed it. I wouldn't mind getting back to my normal life, though.
Children are magnificent. Children have got the most beautiful imaginations in the world. They literally give away fabulous ideas. Adults are too busy looking down at their feet and watching where they step. And children are running through meadows just looking up at the stars, and they know they are going to be able to catch them, and they communicate this. I have 2 children, and I have gotten so many wonderful, fresh new ideas from them. I can never pay them back for it.
I'm not sure the motherhoods come out in my fiction so much as just my interactions with people. If you have dinner with me, I'll wipe your mouth and cut up your meat. But, and I'll tell you to be careful, you know, as I find myself, people I barely know leave a party. Be careful, you know. I do feel like I understand a little more about human behavior, you know, having worked with a child. My son's going to be 6 in July, and I now feel that I know everything I need to know about people, or at least, you know, I know that much, and when he hits puberty, I'll probably know a lot more. But it's a little early to say. I've only had him for, as I said, almost 6 years now, and that's really not a very long time.
Okay, I've been saving the best for last, Monica Hughes. Her science fiction for young adults is highly acclaimed, except in Canada, where she lives. Monica started writing SF for children in 1971 when her youngest child started school. Her ISIS trilogy is a classic. I've always wanted to talk to her. This week I have an excuse. Monica, it's Commander Rick. I live up in a satellite community, and anyway, I'm a big fan. I was wondering, what inspired you to write your first science fiction book?
It was a movie by Jacques Cousteau on an underwater habitat he'd set up in the Red Sea. Just not intended for people to live there, but just an experiment to see if humans could live at pressures of 3 or 4 atmospheres for maybe a week at a time with no adverse physical or psychological effects. And he was testing the people that were doing this. So as I watched it, concentrating with my front of my head, as it were, one of those little nameless thoughts that are always drifted out of the back of my head. What would it be like if people lived under the sea all the time? And just because I'd been hunting for story, I'd been trying to write adventure stories, I was failing, I didn't like what I was doing. I was, as it were, tuned to this passing thought, grabbed it back quickly and turned it into a writing question. What would it be like to be a child growing up under the ocean? And I thought, wow, I have no idea, but wouldn't it be fun to find out? And pretty soon I realized that I was going to be writing science fiction, which again would never have occurred to me, because I had only read adult science fiction. I was brought up on Jules Verne. I loved him so much when I was a kid. I used to get those great big, they were the 19th century editions, Victorian editions, great big fat things with etchings. And I'd get them in French if I couldn't find them in English, and I would fight my way through that heavy, again, 19th century language to get the plot, because his stories, his plots were so good. His characters were terrible, but his plots were wonderful. And I was searching for that. But again, I'd never thought of it for children. So as I sat down to write this story, what is it like living under the sea, I had no idea if anywhere in the world there was a market for juvenile science fiction. It was pure, you know, writing into the blind, as it were, no notion.
You're probably best known for your ISIS trilogy. Was there a particular inspiration for that work?
I wrote it to answer a question about a real person, David, the boy in the glass bubble. He was the child who lived his entire life in a sealed, sterilized room down in Houston, Texas, until he died because he had no immunity to germs. And from the moment when I first heard of him, when he was 3 years old, his life stayed in my mind and my emotions, and I wanted to say something about it. It took me 5 years to understand that what I wanted to say was answering a question again, but not a technological question, a human question. David, are you lonely? And I thought, well, I can't talk to David. I can't make a story about David. I started thinking about places on Earth where one could be alone, be really isolated, couldn't find any, not nowadays. Science fiction, you see, is a tool, again, to do something you cannot do nowadays. I can put a person logically on a planet, have her parents die, so she is left alone. What is life like for a girl growing up alone on a planet all by herself? No rules, no regulations. We only need rules to live with other human beings. But what I found I'd done for readers and for teachers in classrooms was talk about prejudice. Because in the course of the story, I discovered that Alwyn had been changed, that she was not an ordinary Earth child anymore, and that when the settlers come and settle on Isis, they're faced with somebody who's different, and she is faced with finding out that she's different. I never planned that story, but it's one of those things that happened and probably could only happen in science fiction.
From where I sit, it seems that kids today are bombarded with advertising from merchandising monoliths selling everything from video games and New Kids on the Block to G.I. Joes. Do you see yourself as competing with megabuck product lines like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
I don't feel as a writer that I'm competing. I feel that from the point of view of the commercial sale of my books, of course this is so. There are only so many dollars to go around. And the heavily promoted with toys, gimmicks, videos, etc., stories, yeah, well, you can't compete. But on the other hand, I suppose I could say that maybe 50 years from now, somebody might be reading my stories the same way I'm reading E. Nesbit's. And I don't honestly believe that Ninja Mutant Turtles will be anything but an historic byline of weren't they weird in the 1980s and 90s.
Thanks, Monica. It's been a pleasure.
Great. Thank you.
Talk to you again soon. Neat lady. A lot of kids today have it all, and far too many have nothing at all, not even a childhood. You know how many street children there are in the third world? Upwards of 100 million. 40,000 children die every day from disease and malnutrition. 20% of Canadian children live in poverty. We're so worried about what kind of future we're leaving our children. What kind of children are we leaving to the future? Children need hope. Children need imagination. Maybe that's why children love fantasy and science fiction. We shouldn't hurry childhood, because once you're an adult, you give up so much. I mean, when you're an adult, you can't dress up in a costume and pretend you're flying around in a rocket.
Next week on Second Nature, experiments to crossbreed an elephant with pigs produces 35 flattened pigs. Animal rights activists protest so many unnecessary pressed hams.
But wait, there was something I wanted to ask you. Come back, Commander Rick. Come back. Oh, well, guess we'll have to tune in next week. Thanks. That was Prisoners